Okay, friends, we're back. I've got an old oil bottle here that cut a square on the top of it, and I'm using this sort of as my cup for kerosene. So we're going to get started. This is an old toothbrush. Don't worry, I'm not going to actually put this in my mouth. And we're just going to see how this works at cleaning up some of this old rust and grime on here. Bear with me. Well, that looks pretty stinking promising. The Japanning on the front here is beautiful. Looks very, very nice. Minimal chip out on it. If the chip out was bad, I would just take this to my parents' house where I've got a sandblaster, and I would sandblast all the Japanning off and just spray paint it. But I think this is very nicely intact, so we're not going to do that. So this is very cool. Before I took this thing apart, with all the crud and everything that was on here, I thought that this region here was saying Made in USA. Now that I take it apart and I've got it all cleaned up, it says US patent April 19th of 10. Yeah, that's not 2010. That is a 110-year-old plane, is how I interpret that. Now, just because the patent date says 1910, it doesn't mean that that's when it was manufactured. Could be, a few years after that. But still, we are in the ballpark of a century-old plane here. And this is in very nice condition. Going to do a little bit more cleanup with the kerosene and toothbrush because there's some spots that I missed. Excellent. Okay, so there you have it. I'm going to call the sole, at least the business end here, the inside of it, done. There's some regions where the Japanning is chipped off, namely here, a little bit here where the tote covers it anyhow. Down here around the number 5 size designation. And then maybe a little hard to see, but on the the ears here on either side of it. That's kind of chipped off as well. Honestly, don't know why the Japanning would fail there. It's not like that region of the plane would be subjected to, you know, any sort of abrasion. So I don't quite get that, but anyhow. Let's see if I can get some of the crud out of the B and the Bailey there. Yeah, it looks a lot better. I'm not worried about the spots where the Japanning's failed, because I'll just, when it's all said and done, wipe this thing down in a thin coat of oil and we'll be good to go. Won't have to worry about rust. You know, I was kind of hoping that maybe that paint would come off with kerosene, but it doesn't look like it. So we're just going to have to sand that. That's fine though. Sandpaper will make quick work of that. One thing that I've read some people do with corrugated planes, because again, a lot of people hate them, is they'll fill in the voids with an epoxy and then sand it all smooth. If you want to, obviously that's a suggestion for you, but I'm going to leave it as is. I'm not going to fill it in. An important thing you want to look for when purchasing an antique plane, if you want to buy one and try a restoration like this yourself, which I highly recommend you do, the mouth here, it's very important that that's clean, sharp, and doesn't have any nicks or chunks taken out of it. That's kind of a deal breaker. If there's, you know, huge gashes taken out of there, it's going to have some major performance issues, and you're best to just leave that one on the shelf. But otherwise, I think we're going to call the body of this plane clean. And so we're going to move on to cleaning up the component parts. I actually just thought of the idea. I'm going to use my angle grinder with the wire wheel, and that'll clean up the rust and everything from the inside of these grooves really, really well. That'll make quick work of that. But I'll do that off camera because you're really not missing anything. I'm just going to town with an angle grinder. And I'll use it to clean the rust off of the sides here as well. And it'll probably get that paint. It'll take care of that. For now, we're going to work on the small parts here, and same practice, clean them up with kerosene. At some point in time, this tool became unemployed and was left abandoned on the shelf of an antique store for who knows how long. And so I came along and I saw a tool that I can put back to use. Take it off of the unemployment list, if you will. Fix it up, clean it up, restore it into good shape. I'll argue that I'm going to put it into better shape than it was to begin with. And this tool will have a job once more. It will no longer be unemployed. So the efforts of those initial laborers back in the 19-teens who put this thing together, their work is once again making someone's job easier. And that's going to be my job. So I'm going to put this thing to use in projects that I do. Projects that you're going to see on YouTube. And I think that is kind of cool in and of itself. Alright, it's moving along. I think the frog is in pretty good shape. We'll have some lube on there. Kerosene X kind of has a similar to WD-40. It loosens things up. This is much nicer than it was before. But still, we'll get some oil in there. But otherwise, it's clean. It's pretty good. Key notes on this thing is that when we are getting ready to put it back together again, before we flatten the sole, we want to lap in the contact points where the frog meets the plain body. Well, let's clean this up. This thing is pretty nasty. Yeah. Wow. Holy cow. See, I told you the kerosene sort of acted like a WD-40. That did not move like that a minute ago. Sweet. Alright, what's next? I'm not going to bother cleaning this up with kerosene and a toothbrush. There's no point in that. So let's go after these little parts here. This is where a bench grinder and a wire wheel would be really handy, but I do not have one. Okay, so off camera, I'm going to go ahead and take some of these parts out to the garage, clean them up real quick with the angle iron and wire cup wheel. I don't want to bring that thing in here. There's too much dust and whatnot to fling around. So I'll get back to you guys when everything is cleaned up here. Okay, so we're back after about a half hour of working with the angle grinder. Pretty pleased with the results. That's the lever cap. Looks beautiful now. Chip breaker. That cleaned up very nicely. I mentioned before that they had a really cool blue heat treating sort of passivation layer on there. That blue is a sort of rust. I also spent some time blacksmithing, and you'll see that it is an iron oxide, but it's not the same as a rust. It's a different crystalline structure, so it's not as destructive, and it also acts as somewhat of a rust proofing in and of itself. Not a perfect one, as you can see. There's little spots of rust throughout there, but it does work. But this area back here was really rusty, so I cleaned that up, but I left some of that original tempering oxide on there, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, I nicked my thumb with the angle grinder with the wire wheel, but yeah, it's not that bad. Let's see, this thing looks amazing now that I cleaned it up with the angle iron, and not angle iron, angle grinder. cleaned out all these channels beautifully. This looks terrific now. The sides, again, they cleaned up very, very nicely. And then I cleaned up some of these screws. I didn't want to go after the threads because you could compromise them. The angle grinder is a very aggressive tool and it could destroy the threads, so I just cleaned up the heads of these screws. I've got a Dremel with a little wire wheel, so I'm going to use that to clean up the threads there. I'm also going to use the Dremel to clean up the plane skew adjusting lever here, and maybe some other areas on this the frog, because I didn't want to go after this with the angle grinder. There's too many nooks and crannies, etc. One unfortunate thing that I noticed was, I've never seen this before on any of the planes that I've restored, but you can probably see on camera this thing is very bent. There's a massive dent in it right here. It's bent around here. I mean, it is really messed up. So I'm not sure what to make of that. I can try hammering it flat again. Just a hammer and anvil. These should be two pieces of steel forge welded together, and I can kind of see it right here. I'm not sure if that comes out on the camera, but I treated this surface the same, used the same wire wheel with the angle grinder, but you can see a difference in color here, and that's where they would have forge welded a softer mild steel back here and a hard tool steel up front, because this is the business end. This is the business end of the plane. And so that's kind of a cost savings, as well as it makes it easier to machine the grooves in here when you're just cutting mild steel rather than trying to machine these grooves in tool steel. Another thing that I actually just now noticed is, I'm going to zoom in here. So if you look right there, there's a little heart with SW inside it, and that is a Stanley Sweetheart. I've never seen that before. I've heard of it, but I've never seen that before, so that makes me want to see about flattening this thing out so that I can continue to use it. Now, again, sort of the business end of it, the front of it is relatively straight. It's only really bent back in this area, so that might not be a performance inhibitor. But in the event that I do notice it affects the performance in a negative way and hitting it with a hammer is not able to remedy the problem, I do have a brand new, thicker, much thicker plane blade. This is a high-end one by IBC, made in Canada. I've used these on some of my other planes. I have a couple of them, and that's a phenomenal tool. A much thicker plane iron, again, reduces vibration in the tool, and when you reduce vibration, you have a much smoother cut. So this is an option if I can't fix this, but I'm still going to put an edge on this one and see if I can put it to use, because I think that's really cool that I've got a Stanley Sweetheart. That's kind of a coveted name to have that era of the tool. So we're looking really, really good so far. However, it's about 10 after 1 in the morning, and I am going to clean my hands up and go to bed. Thank you very much for watching.